Wetwork Media presents Dan Lauer's Post Meridiem, an unreliable memoir of madness in Los Angeles. Part 1, Psychosis, Chapters 6 through 10. Two possibilities exist. Either we are alone in the universe, or we are not. Both are equally terrifying. Arthur C. Clarke. I have suffered from major depression in one form or another since I was 14 years old. I saw the same psychiatrist for 10 years, but I lost my insurance once I turned 25, and like so many of my generation, haven't found a career worth keeping that offers health benefits. Not that I would want it if I found it. I'm an artist, after all. I had a depressive episode after being off meds for several months just before I moved to Arizona, which was a pit stop on the way to the West Coast. I found a doctor, paid out of pocket, got back on medication, got better, felt better, didn't feel I needed the meds anymore, stopped them, ignored the backslide, and got sick all over again. My last psychiatrist warned me that this would happen. He was an overweight Middle Eastern man in his early 60s, vaguely reminiscent of the bastard love child of a caramel-colored George Lucas and a life-sized version of the Diggum cereal frog. His voice was short and thick, full of wisdom and hummus. He intimidated me when he spoke. This is not an isolated incident. We have proof that every time you cease medication, you have an episode, each one worse than the last. I assure you, if you stop taking your medication again, the next episode is going to be much, much worse, okay? He menaced. I nodded and smiled. I made myself a promise I'd find Prozac come hell or high water. I'd deal with the black market scene. If need be, sit in some apartment in North Hollywood, a little smoke-filled waiting room, doing my best to score illegally. People next to me on the nod, lambing it out, looking for something to get flush and not to get me off. Then I moved out of state, started working, made new friends, got excited by life, and completely ignored my health. I ate poorly, started drinking again, smoked like a chimney, stayed up all night, took no medication, living fast and loose with the rules and the truth of my mind and body. It is exhilarating to rebel against yourself, more so than any other institution. I can't say why that was, but I felt alive. And now I need to end it already. This is becoming not worth it anymore. No one would really care anyway, right? It's not about them. Fuck them. What have they ever done for me? I am so alone here. I'm so tired. No human should have to suffer through this. Not ever. I couldn't decide if I was very complicated or very simple, very smart or very stupid, very shallow or very deep. I didn't think I was any of those things, and I felt like all of them at once. Couldn't stand my own mind. I was at war with myself. I was not imagining things. The world had gone insane. I was perfectly fine. How should I do it? What's easiest, cleanest? I could take pills, lots of Lortab and liquor back at the apartment. I'd be just one more upturned idiot choking on his own sour vomit somewhere on the outer rim of LA County. What would they say about me? I was a junkie, an alcoholic, both. Would anyone come to my funeral? Would anyone blame themselves? This is becoming my LA story. I wonder whether or not I am truly this selfish. Something you should probably know about me. At the funeral of my mother's adoptive father, I drew her close to me, barely 6 feet from the casket, and put on a somber face, more somber than I'd had up to that point. It's hard to admit, but I didn't care for the man. I've been meaning to tell you, I said. Panic overtook my mother. Now something else on top of her dead stepfather, who she also had her fair share of grievances with. Her son was in some sort of trouble. She steadied herself. What? What is it? Hushed, panicked tones. I didn't have a plan, per se. I just desperately needed to break the tension. So the Rolodex of awful lies spun quickly in my head, and within a second or two I settled on one, leaned in just a bit closer, and whispered, I have AIDS. What? She screamed loud enough that the rest of the mourners turned to look at us. She noticed and then turned back to me to find an expression of joy on my face and then slapped me hard on the shoulder. Boil that down to just a single sentence. I lied to my mother about having AIDS at her father's funeral. David gave me the 800 number of a state-run psychiatric facility, and I wrote it frantically on the back of a Vaughn's supermarket circular I had in my passenger seat for some reason. I called the number and explained as quickly as possible. Hello, my name is Dan. I am 26. I am severely psychotically depressed and thinking a lot about suicide. People are out to get me. I can't tell you who or why, and I know it shouldn't be true, but it is. Also, there's an alien living in my brain. I think it's probably a male, but I'm not totally positive. There was an odd comfort in the brevity of the explanation, insane as it sounded. No small talk, no tap dancing, no beating around the bush. Here is what you want to know. Here is what I have to tell you. The woman on the line took my name, phone number, and the details. I didn't know why and did not ask, but I assume it was for record-keeping purposes. Later in the day, around the water cooler, how many nut jobs with extraterrestrial stowaways in their brains today, Maud? She checks her notes. Only the one. Strange. Usually more this time of year. Once the data entry was completed, she suggested I go immediately to the nearest Los Angeles County psychiatric emergency room. Who knew there was such a thing? Then again, why would there not be in that city of all places? Maud asked me where I was located. I still wasn't totally sure. Vague patches of road looked familiar. It was a CVS parking lot, but they dotted the area. I'd driven aimlessly from my apartment in large, weaving loops for some vague amount of time. Minutes, hours, days, a millennia. I told her I lived in Glendale. She told me the nearest location was about 45 minutes away, and that I would need to find someone to drive me. There is no one, I said solemnly. There must be, she replied. Sympathy or frustration. I'm already in the car. Now is the time. Must not delay. Hurry, please, with the address. Okay, I advise against driving yourself, Maud said. But I can't stop you. Do you have a pen? I will give you the address. Why did he give me the cigarettes for free? I'll forever wonder. Nothing is free in this life, particularly not as utterly unnecessary as cigarettes, and especially in a city like Los Angeles, where I was surprised there wasn't a scenery tax. Although I suppose there was, just not in legal tender, but something more like sweat, perhaps, and tears. I stopped at a gas station somewhere on Los Feliz Boulevard on the way to Interstate 5. It was so hot in my car that my t-shirt was tightening up around me, contracting, drenched with sweat. I pulled up next to the pump and put a few dollars worth in. The trip to the hospital would cost me only a couple of gallons, which was luck of a kind, because it was all I could afford. The store was cold and smelled like cheap, pineapple-scented cleaning fluid, doused haphazardly on the floor and hosed into grates dotting the linoleum once a month. I stepped to the counter and waited for the woman in front of me to complete her purchase. She was pushing 90 and counting out quarters on the counter, a huge handful to pay for a package of vanilla-flavored cakes in cellophane. Desperation began to rise from a pit in my stomach, impatience on a scale hitherto experienced by mankind. After several agonizing moments standing to the rear, fist to my mouth, stifling another outburst, the change matron moved away and I stepped to the counter. Finally. The clerk was a few years older than me, wore cargo shorts and a wife beater stained with something red, and a trucker hat. He was bleary-eyed, stoned, blitzed, real gone. His name tag read Danny. What do you have? I'd put his drawl somewhere on the border of Kentucky and Virginia. He's a sketch comedian, just works days in a shitty little shell station on the border of Glendale and Los Feliz while he gets his stand-up off the ground. Days selling cigarillos, evenings at Upright Citizens Brigade. One-man show is getting some traction around town. Same old story I didn't want to hear. I was short on cash, so I carefully eyed the brands and their assigned prices. Too much, too much, too much. What's your brand? Danny asked, palms up on the counter, leaning forward so I could see more of his chest hair than I'd have liked to. Pall Mall, I told him. Blue, hundreds. Danny nodded at me. He got it. I narrowed my eyes at him. What exactly did Danny get? He grabbed a pack from the column behind him and slipped it across the counter. He looked left. He looked right. No fuzz on the horizon. Just take 'em, Danny said and nodded at me. These don't sell anyway. Only old men smoke them. I nodded and did my best to flash him a half-human smile. It probably came off like a snarl, viciousness. Thanks. Long moments then, silence, quiet, nonsense. I didn't understand what was happening. Take it easy, I told him and lunged away from the counter, feeling suddenly like I had to escape right then or there, or I'd be stuck forever, thumbing tattoo magazines and drinking energy shots full of caffeine, acai berry, and yerba mate. Oh, he said, and folded his arms over each other as I ran for the door. I always do. After rushing back to my car, I hopped in and peeled out onto the surface of the road, no doubt cutting the change matron off as she tried to enter the right lane. I didn't take notice or care. I was so hot I was having trouble thinking. My skin was burning to the touch. The beads of sweat ran down my face, staining my glasses, mixing with the drying tears. I lit a cigarette and inhaled, but I don't recall exhaling, feeling with certainty that I had to get the fuck out of Dodge post-haste. That was becoming clearer all the time. During the drive, I was desperately hoping for a lonely asylum in the mountains, something right out of a movie that I'd never actually seen, but probably existed. Sylmar, California is the northernmost neighborhood in Los Angeles County. It is sandwiched between Granada Hills to the west, Cagle Canyon to the east, and San Fernando to the south. To the north lies the expansive San Gabriel mountain range. On the crest of the foothills sits a boxy white structure called the Olive View UCLA Medical Center. The trip from Glendale took me on the 5 freeway through the valley and into the mountains. It was a winding, narrow, daunting pass, especially near the 5 o'clock hour on a weekday. Every other commuter has the same idea, it seems, and they are all headed for the hospital too, with puffy red faces and sunken, bloodshot eyes on small, weakened frames, with organ grinders and their hideous fez-wearing monkeys perched precariously on the edge of their semi-conscious minds. I drove for what felt like hours, but no more than 45 minutes passed, max. The mountainous view and its entire calming, rolling cloud splendor allowed moments of exquisite relief. Those hideous thoughts I desperately attempted to reject for most of my waking moments began to wane. Those outskirts were soothing the frenetic pace of my thoughts in the city. Hope came to me for the first time in days, but was quickly washed away by the sounds of commotion and fear fighting tooth and nail for center stage in my head. I approached the hospital and parked in Lot C across from the emergency entrance. I turned my cell phone off and tried to light one last cigarette before I made that final plunge into the unknown. My Bic lighter was out of fluid, and I grunted and heaved it across the parking lot where it skipped 3 times on the blacktop like a flat rock on a still pond and was gone in the underbrush. My hands were shaking too violently anyway to align the flame with the tip of the cigarette. That was a sign, obviously. I didn't need another cigarette. I made my way across the parking lot and traversed a grassy patch to the main emergency entrance. This is it. No turning back. The lunatic is on the grass. The building loomed huge ahead, growing larger with every step I took across the grass. And then suddenly I was on pavement, edging closer and closer, and the building began to shrink and come toward me, a reverse push-pull. And on the side of the building, in huge red letters, some graffito had sprayed the words, "Dionysus, get back?" And why is that a question? Am I supposed to turn around? Me, the god of wine and the fruitful harvest? This is my ritual madness. Am I to endure? Find religious ecstasy in the theater of it all? I can't be sure. There are signs all around me. I entered the sliding glass doors of the hospital, and a cool breeze washed over me. I closed my eyes and felt relief on my burning skin. This is good here, no? A metal detector and 2 armed police officers menaced me just inside the lobby. No turnstiles. I wondered why. I was not a criminal. I had done nothing wrong, but the nagging sensation of paranoia assured me that I would be arrested as soon as they saw me. Things were about to get serious. I couldn't make it through the archway. No chance. My possessions would be confiscated. I would be jailed without reason or trial, perhaps Guantanamo. I was an enemy of the state, but no one had figured it out yet, nor had I. They were about to. They had me at last. The sensation was so pure, so incredibly vivid, that I almost pivoted and ran back through the doors and into the parking lot. But reason was still with me, at least in the most basic of terms, hanging by a narrow thread. I am Joseph K. All metal objects in the tray, the voice boomed. Fascist. He was one of them, it was clear. But I didn't want to give anything away. Then, surely, it was not the time. Keys, wallet, cell phone, one loose cigarette, and change all went into a tray. I made it through the metal detector without incident and gathered my things on the other side. Miracle. The guards pay me no mind. He and the other guard are having a conversation about some anonymous, meaningless sporting event. State U versus University State. State U is even money. I am somehow anonymous. And this occurs to me for the first time that day in a city of millions who would step briskly over my rotting corpse with only the worry of staining their shoes on the effluence oozing onto the sidewalk. There was a large array of signs on the ceiling above me. The place was dirty and unkempt. The floors were scuffed, and dry mop drags were apparent everywhere, tracing little steps where the janitor had recently trodden. It was cold and sterile, and not the least bit comforting. I bit my bottom lip and found the sign that read, Psychiatric Emergency Room. These signs were everywhere, and they pointed me through the serpentine labyrinth of empty corridors. Empty. It was late afternoon on a Friday. Why was this hospital almost entirely devoid of people? This was disconcerting. Here, surely, was where the trap would be sprung. But I was soon hopeful that the ghost town population might be indicative of the number of people in front of me, and therefore my wait time in the ER itself. When I finally found the door that I was meant to open and saw the tiny red stenciled letters, Psychiatric Emergency Room, I paused, took a breath, and pushed through to the other side, hoping to be born anew. It must have been a school day. I remember sitting on my parents' bed while my father dressed for work and my mother was on the phone with the school, explaining that I would be absent. I was 14. My mother cried so hard I can still remember the fear on her face. Just thinking about it puts a pit in my stomach and sets my teeth on edge. The day before that, I was down, I was sad, I was blue. Then, that morning, I had depression. It had a name, it had a face, but it didn't have a purpose. I wasn't sad for any reason. My life should have been a happy one. This is the most torturous aspect of my depression, and I suppose depression in general. You cannot rationalize the feeling or make sense of the despair. I am sad. Yes, but why? I don't know. I know. We're in trouble, aren't we? Most definitely. My mother called the pediatrician's office. The process wasn't simple for the first time either. Where do you go? Who do you talk to? Your son writes you an elegant note stating that he is seriously considering suicide, that he'd been locked in his room for days because he couldn't stop crying, that he feels no joy or hope for anything, and you panic. But then, the next moment, you wonder what to do about it. Is that the best option? I heard my mother ask. She waited. I was staring at my feet. They were thin. I'd lost a lot of weight. I was a skinny, depressed, little 14-year-old. Okay, she said and hung up the phone. My father was in their walk-in closet. He was putting on his suit. I remember it clearly, blue blazer, tan slacks. I despised that look now as an adult, but thought at the time I'd like to emulate it someday. In that moment, my greatest hope was to one day be like my father. Flash forward, and it's my greatest fear. He peered out of the closet from time to time to glance at me while he was dressing, and my mother was on the phone with the doctor and the school. The expression on his face as he made occasional eye contact was unmistakable. What luck! A real, live ET right here in my bedroom. This is probably the moment he stops being able to relate to me. It might have been easier if I'd been gay. At least that means something. So, you like dick, huh? He'd ask. Yes, I'd respond. And then he'd shrug. It's physically repellent to me, but whatever you want, he'd say. But no, it couldn't be cut and dry. I love tits and pussy and I want to kill myself right this second. One part of that equation makes me a man. The other makes me a mythical creature. A failure as a son, as a human. For all the shit my father gave me for my behavior up to that point, he never would have accused me from across the dinner table of not possessing a survival instinct. No one would have. The next thing I know, I'm dressed, and we're at the emergency room, the first in a long line. And we're in the waiting room, and my head is pounding from crying, and I'm too confused and sick to be thankful that I'll miss today. Anna, my girlfriend, would be worried, or maybe not. I've been pulling the disappearing act as of late. And hey, she might not even notice that I miss school. Well, I won't miss it. Not a soul could possibly have been left in the greater Los Angeles area. No. They were all there in that room waiting to see a doctor. Babies screamed as sickly geriatrics hacked all over each other. And men, caricatures of cowboys direct from central casting, held bloody rags over absent appendages, and I sloshed through the swamp of misery in my black t-shirt, avoiding eye contact at all costs. It turned out that the standard ER and the psychiatric ER shared waiting rooms. Poor planning, tremendous understatement. Don't let them know how crazy I am or how sick. They'll kill the weak to cut their wait time down by a few minutes. I would. Fair is fair during times like these. But then again, the man in the suit, I've seen him before. He was at the diner last week. He picked the booth opposite me. He ordered my meal. He followed me here. He's one of them. Be quiet. I made my way to the triage desk, which was situated behind what looked like thick, bulletproof glass. I was finally getting used to this after being in country for nearly a year. Nearly every state or county-run facility in greater Los Angeles, between the guards and metal detectors and bulletproof glass, seems as though it is either preparing for an invasion or recovering from one, or both. The Hispanic intake nurse behind the glass wore a name badge that read Hector. Hector was arguing with a tall, long-haired, bearded man in torn blue cutoff jeans about the wait time, and telling him in a very thick Mexican twang the wait wouldn't be very mucho longer. As the argument continued, I stepped away to a small wooden table clearly held over from somewhere between the Cuban Missile Crisis and Nixon's first electoral victory, behind me with some papers on it. I was always laboring under the assumption I would have to fill something out and figured I'd get a head start. Even then, yes, worried about the wait, always the wait, impatience. Take the first step. Have some initiative, for Christ's sake. I retrieved one or two of the most obvious intake forms, but I couldn't figure out if any of them applied, and they were intimidating and confusing. So many boxes with so many adjoining questions, so much information to provide. So much I couldn't provide with any kind of clarity. I held the forms in front of my face side by side, and the words danced on the pages, the questions so bizarre. Are you under the impression that you are being studied by beings from another world? Yes, no. Is an extraterrestrial currently living inside your brain? Yes, no. Do you believe if you focused hard enough, you could levitate? Yes, no. Cetos pictin defragus pauntrinad? Huh? What? The argument in front of me at the counter ended, clearly to the dissatisfaction of the man in the acid wash, and I moved back to Hector. He glanced up at me, considered me for a fleeting moment, and then went back to the paperwork on his desk. Goodbye, then? I didn't say a word. I just stood there and stared awkwardly, probably breathing a little too heavily through my mouth. After another moment, Hector looked up again, and I tried to smile. I don't know why. It wasn't going to help either of us. I'm sure it looked more like a rabid snarl than a pleasantry. I'd forgotten how to smile like a real human being. Can I help you? He barked, looking frustrated. Yes, I said. I called a hotline and they told me to come to the psychiatric emergency room. Again, Hector simply stared blankly. And I felt very small, something less than a speck of dust teetering precariously on the head of a sewing needle, smaller even, infinitesimal, quantum, non existent. You want to see the doctor, see? Please, I said. And it was the most honest, direct, loaded word I'd ever spoken, and yet somehow it was said in someone else's hushed, high pitched voice, not my own. It was a plea. Please, please, someone help me before I explode right here on the floor, under these fluorescents, leaving gore and bone in a pile in front of the bulletproof glass, which, insult to injury, wouldn't be the strangest thing to have happened in the waiting room that day. What is the problem? He asked, heavy sighs in his tone. I felt the wasp in me lurking at the edge of the exchange and nearly apologized for wasting his time before turning and walking away, tail between my legs. Persevere. It's the only hope I have. I think I might want to kill myself very soon, and there are too many people following me. I don't know how to shake them anymore. Do you know who they are? Magic words. The next 10 or 15 minutes were a total blur of questions and nurses and doctors and hallways. For the next 68 hours, I was never alone except to use the bathroom, and even then, someone was leaning against the outside of an unlocked door. When you're young, being sick is usually a reprieve, even when it's painful. It means movies in bed, napping on and off all day, skipping school, being pampered, perhaps a happy meal. But this, depression, no one can see it. You don't cough, vomit, bleed, or sweat with fever. You have to say it out loud. It's not like if you cut your hand down to the bone, you have to give a hurried preamble before anyone will help you. So sorry to interrupt you, and I know this may make you uncomfortable, but it seems I cut my hand almost off. See it hanging there? Sure. Yeah, that's my blood. Explaining it is not really any easier now. It feels as if someone else is speaking through you. This is nothing a normal person would ever say. Why are we the only animals who can self-destruct like this? But after about a 4-hour wait time in the ER with my mother sitting next to me, clutching my hand and asking me every 10 minutes, how are you feeling? We were finally, mercifully, escorted back to an examination room just in time. The psychiatrist on duty was a pretty young woman named Marie. Not doctor or anything. She let me call her Marie. Marie comforted me. You're going to be okay, sweetie, really. I've seen a lot of people just like you. You're so brave for telling people how you feel. It took a lot of strength. Marie hugged me. There you go. You see, it's going to be fine now. It's all going to be okay. I was simply a little boy to Marie, and she asked me what was wrong, and I told her. I'm thinking about killing myself, or I was thinking about taking a gun to school. I was thinking about holding my class hostage. I was thinking that that would be a good way to get help. It was easier than saying it, I thought. I was thinking about how to avoid being shot. I was thinking about where to get a gun. I was thinking about not living. I couldn't see past this moment. I have no hope, I told her. I didn't look at the time, but I'm sure my mother's mouth was hanging open in terror. Marie held my hand and looked me in the eye and told me everything would be okay. Everything is going to be okay, Dan. I promise. No judgment, no repulsion. Marie understood. She had sparkling brown eyes with little flecks of reflective gold in them, and when she smiled, I shivered slightly. So now then, here I am, or there I was. It depends on your point of view. Back in the fishbowl, either here, sitting in a chair in the examination room, or there, in the main section, staring into the examination room back at myself. Regardless, I didn't like the look of things. An additional hour had passed. At that moment, I was something slightly more than a beast and significantly less than a man. Something in between and something horrible. Not a single thought in my head for the last half hour except stabilize. The support staff all had their hands out to their sides in the universal gesture that reads, "It's not my fault." Dr. Murphy, who was standing in the fishbowl yelling as loud as he could, was upset because Jackie is not present and is outside having a cigarette. I think Jackie has the right idea, and I wish I could do the same. Fuck my problems. I needed nicotine. I needed a fix. Stat. Oh, and who is Jackie? I don't understand, Dr. Murphy said, tone growing more aggressive. I was called down from dinner because I was told Jackie had a patient who was suicidal. Dr. Murphy was a lanky ginger with a scruffy red goatee and sunken bags under his eyes. He was the epitome of an ER post-MD resident. Perhaps he wanted to be a plastic surgeon one day in Beverly Hills making the serious money. Perhaps he was just biding his time here to get a little something for the CV. Perhaps not. At that moment, he was on his psych rotation. He didn't think he was cut out for it. I didn't think so either. It looked like it had been a long day for him, and amongst other things, the fact that I was suicidal was interrupting his hospital mess hall steak and sweet potato french fries. I watched through the fishbowl as he grabbed my file, paused at the door to the exam room, sighed, and psyched himself up. You can do this, you can do this, you can do this. He entered the room with a grim smile on his face. I couldn't help but wonder whether or not the admin staff had somehow managed to forget that the room in which I was sitting in was surrounded by glass and not soundproofed, so I had definitely seen and heard everything that occurred in the preceding moments. When he entered, I looked at him from over top of my glasses. It's the look my father gave me when I was in trouble as a child. Dr. Murphy sat and adjusted uncomfortably in the tiny seat. His white coat was stained. His pens were low on ink. He was nervous. I could smell it on him. So, Dan, he began, and then lost his place in the chart. I felt him fumble. This must be a chore. Not in the pejorative sense of the word. Maybe he'd feel accomplished once it's over. Maybe we both would. But in that moment, we'd both rather have been anywhere else. I wondered what it was like on the beach in Malibu then. Cold. The sun was going down, wasn't it? The water must be frigid. How are you feeling? Not good, I managed. He nodded, and there was some sympathy there, but also indignity. He wanted to say, well, that's fucking obvious, but was kind enough to refrain. Can you tell me why you came here today? I thought about it for a moment. To get help? I didn't know what else to do. I called a hotline. They told me to come here. Every statement was a question. Every question was a statement. Up was sideways and black was purple, and crazy things seemed sane and sane things were certainly normal. I had the sudden compulsion to leap across the table and grab Dr. Ginger menacingly by his pressed white coat collar and get eye to eye with him. Let him know I mean business. Let him feel my breath on his cheek. Listen here, you ginger fuck. I know a serious morphine addiction when I see one. That's right. I'm DEA, undercover, here to burn all of you junkie freaks. One false move and it's all over. For now, just give me a few special privileges, smoke breaks and the like, and I'll see what I can do. Are we savvy? But I didn't bother. I knew I didn't possess the mettle for that at the moment. Have you been hospitalized before? Twice. 4. Beat. Depression? Were you psychotic then too? Psychotic? I know what the word means in practicality. Literally, loss of contact with reality. What it means in the parlance, colloquially, Ted Bundy dancing with Norman Bates all dragged out to look like Mother in a pit of flames suddenly springs to mind. Yes, psychotic. There was some silence there, or perhaps not. Large portions of the negative have been censored and redacted because this film is not yet rated. Only certain reels are available. Then I was crying again all of a sudden. Dr. Murphy was telling me I needed to be hospitalized immediately. How long? I'm not sure. At least 72 hours, maybe longer. We'll have to see how it goes. What if I say no? No, I don't want to be here. No, I want to stand and walk out. No, I have made a mistake. No, you can't keep me here against my will. Things in the room settle, and the pressures of the day suddenly dripped away from the expression he was wearing. And whatever training he'd had in dealing with the mad ramblings of the psychotic and lost were slowly trickling back. His voice softened. He leaned closer to me. Okay, here's the deal. And I need you to be honest, because if you aren't, that means I can't help you, and that's what I want to do, okay? Are you still thinking of suicide? Are you thinking about it right now? Does it seem like a good solution? I nodded slowly. Okay, then. I'm sorry, buddy. You can't say no anymore. He shrugged sympathetically and then, with more sincerity than I would have given him credit for, said, "This is your best option to get better. I truly think so. We can have you up and around soon. We can get you back on your medication and take you out of life for a while. That is all people need sometimes, okay?" I nodded again. "Okay," he said softly. "I'm going to fill this out. I need you to sign it, stating that you understand that you are going to be involuntarily held in our facility for observation for 72 hours because you are a danger to yourself." He scribbled on a single sheet of paper, slid it over to me, held out a pen. A huge ball black point. It looked 7 feet tall, shutting out all light from behind, casting an opaque shadow. It was hard to make out the writing on the paper, scribbled in a distinct doctor's hand. The page in part read, "You are severely depressed and having thoughts of suicide. You are dangerous to yourself." I signed it quickly and without reading the rest, again with a signature that somehow belonged to someone else. "Okay, they're freeing up a bed for you now. We have 2 rooms, the pink room and the blue room. You'll probably be in the blue room. There is staff inside at all times, and they can answer any questions you have. Not much happens over the weekend here, and your 72 hours won't be up until Monday afternoon, but we can get your medication going, okay?" I nodded and began again to well with tears. "What will this cost?" "Now, nothing." "Good," I told him. "I don't have any insurance." He nodded. "Okay." They said that a lot there, and it was starting to aggravate me. The ginger doctor exited the room, and Nurse Paul entered, as if he'd been in the wings, awaiting a silent cue to enter stage left. "Oh, you again." I had signed away my freedom for a minimum of 72 hours. There was no backing out. That was that. "I need to collect your personal effects." "Isn't that a phrase reserved for when someone dies?" No reaction. "You can't take anything in the room with you except for your clothes. We tag it and bag it here. You'll get it back when you leave." "Yeah, I've seen that in a bunch of movies." "I'm serious. Please empty your pockets." I stood and retrieved everything out of my pockets. Nurse Paul sat and organized it neatly on the table. It didn't take him long. The pitiful collection of items was all that made me me at that moment. No more freedom, no more sunshine, no more fresh air, no more cigarettes. I just signed away my right to go home, something that had occurred to me, I suppose, as I was making my mark on the document, but was only really starting to sink in. Each moment, I was confronted by increasingly dense realities within the greater gravity of the situation. Each moment, I was closer and closer to making a run for the door. Insult to injury, it's not like I was particularly concerned about getting any of that shit back. I quickly scanned over it on the table, all laid out in perfect order. The pathetic contents of my wallet, a wallet I'd received as a high school graduation gift, my cracked, dirty cellular phone, my Florida driver's license, a canceled credit card, some brand rewards cards, and my AAA card. The driver's license gave me pause. I was suddenly sure they were going to arrest me for residing primarily in California for nearly a year and never updating to an in-state license. Nurse Paul made note of each thing as he picked it up and studied it. It may have been the paranoia, but I sensed him judging me out of the corner of his eye, disgusted by what I'd placed on the table. He was either expecting more, or I produced exactly what he was expecting. I couldn't decide which thought was more troubling. If you're enjoying Post Meridiem and just cannot get enough of a good thing, it is available for pre-order now as a beautiful ebook available from Amazon and Apple Books. The ebook version of Post Meridiem includes additional content, illustrations, and even an additional 5th part not included in the free audiobook version. Search for Post Meridiem and Dan Lauer on Amazon or Apple, or visit wetworkmedia.com/post-meridium for more information.